Oh my God.
Turn the engine off now.
Officer, this is
Step out of the vehicle right now.
I live here. I haven't done anything.
Stop resisting.
She parked in her own driveway after a long day at work. No sirens, no warning, no crime. Seconds later, a police cruiser blocked her in. Before she could even turn off the engine, a voice shouted, "Turn the engine off. Step out of the vehicle." She calmly said the words that should have ended everything instantly. "I live here." What happened next wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, one that would expose years of ignored warnings, shake an entire city, and cost more than money. This is a story of what happens when authority stops listening. And truth shows up anyway. Officer Matthew Klene wasn't new to the badge. 9 years on the force had taught him how to stand straight, how to speak calmly into a radio, how to write reports that sounded clean and professional. On paper, he was the kind of officer departments like to defend, asterisk, highly proactive, detail-oriented, committed to public safety, asterisk, but paper has a way of hiding people. Buried beneath those polished phrases was a pattern no one wanted to say out loud. 7 internal complaints for involving excessive force, 3 alleging racial profiling. Every complaint followed the same quiet path. Filed, reviewed, dismissed, not because nothing happened, but because proving intent is harder than protecting career. Supervisors had noticed. In briefings, his name came up more than once. Escalates too quickly, someone said. Another added, asterisk, situations go from calm to hostile fast when he's involved. Asterisk risk management flagged as traffic stop data. Black drivers, affluent neighborhoods. Late evenings. The numbers leaned too heavily in one direction to be coincidence. Emails were sent, carefully worded, non-accusatory. Asterisk, something to keep an eye on. Asterisk, may require additional training. Asterisk, nothing urgent, nothing public, because urgency creates accountability, and accountability creates problems. So instead, they reassigned shifts, closed files, scheduled workshops that changed nothing. Matthew Klene kept his badge, his patrol car's authority, and the unspoken permission that comes with silence. To the department, he was manageable. To the system, he was familiar. And to the people he stopped, especially black residents who didn't fit the neighborhood, he was unpredictable. No one called him a racist. Not officially. That word makes people uncomfortable. It invites lawsuits, press conferences, and hard questions. It's easier to say miscommunication or asterisk, officer safety concern. Asterisk, easier still to look away. Because complaints were easier to close than careers. Because patterns were easier to ignore than consequences. And because no one imagined that one ordinary evening, one parking spot, one routine moment, would finally force the truth into the open. The system believed it had contained the problem. It hadn't. It had only been waiting. Cresta looked exactly the way safety brochures promised it would. Tree-lined streets curved gently through rows of immaculate homes. Lawns were trimmed with quiet precision, hedges shaped into soft geometry. There were no sidewalks cracked by neglect, no graffiti, no noise that lingered longer than a passing car. This was the kind of neighborhood people described with a single word, safe, without ever asking who that safety was meant for. At 4:20 p.m. on a calm April afternoon, a black BMW turned onto Elia Drive. It didn't speed. It didn't drift. It didn't hesitate. Behind the wheel was Judge Vanessa Porter. She had spent the day in court listening to arguments about zoning disputes and contract violations, small cases that carried big consequences for ordinary people. Her robe still hung over her shoulders, loosened at the collar, a quiet reminder of a job that demanded authority even when she felt exhausted. Her mind wasn't on the road. It was on dinner plans, on the pharmacy run she still needed to make, on whether her mother had remembered to take her medication that morning. She turned into the driveway of the house she owned outright, a 2-story colonial she had worked nearly 2 decades to afford. As the engine idled, she reached for her phone to check a message. That's when the cruiser stopped behind her. No flashing lights, no siren, no announcement, just a low, unmistakable hum of a police engine settling into place. Vanessa glanced into the rearview mirror, confused more than alarmed. Maybe he's lost, she thought. Or maybe he was responding to something nearby. She had done nothing wrong. She knew that with the calm certainty of someone who enforced the law for a living. Still, something tightened in her chest. She stepped out of the car slowly, keys in hand, robe visible, heels clicking softly against the driveway she paid for every month without fail. Before she could reach her front door, the officer's voice cut through the quiet. "Ma'am, step away from a vehicle." The tone wasn't curious. It wasn't polite. It was sharp, commanding, final. Vanessa turned, eyebrows knitting together. "Is there a problem, officer?" Matthew Klene had already exited his cruiser. His hand hovered near his belt, posture rigid, eyes scanning not the house, but her. "Whose car is this?" he asked. "Mine," she answered calmly. "I live here." He didn't respond. Instead, he glanced at the BMW, then at the house, then back at her, as if the three didn't align in his mind. License and registration. Vanessa paused, not out of defiance, but confusion. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped? I haven't even entered traffic." "You were driving suspiciously," he said. Suspiciously. On a street with no crime reports that week. At 4:20 in the afternoon, into her own driveway. She reached into the car to retrieve her wallet. Careful, deliberate. The way Black Americans are taught to move around police, regardless of education, title, or position. As she handed over her license, his eyes lingered on it longer than necessary. "Vanessa Porter," he read aloud. "This address?" "Yes." He looked up sharply. "You don't look like you live here." The sentence landed heavier than a shout. Vanessa felt it, that familiar, unwelcome shift in the air. The moment when a conversation stops being about facts and starts being about perception, about assumptions no document can erase. "I am a circuit court judge," she said evenly. "I just came from court." She gestured lightly to the robe. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, doubt, but it vanished quickly, replaced by irritation. "Step back from the car," he repeated, louder this time. Neighbors' curtains stirred. A garage door across the street paused halfway down, then stopped. Phones appeared behind windows. Not recording yet, just watching. Vanessa complied. She always had. Compliance, she knew, was often mistaken for guilt, but non-compliance could be dangerous. She stood barefoot now, heels abandoned near the car, robe brushing against her legs as the breeze picked up. "What is the reason for this stop?" she asked again, voice steady but firm. Matthew Klene didn't answer. Instead, he called for backup. The radio crackled in the quiet neighborhood, a sound so out of place it felt invasive. Crest Hill wasn't used to police radios. It was used to dog walkers, delivery vans, and silence. To the officer, this wasn't a homeowner returning from work. She wasn't a judge. She wasn't a resident. She wasn't authority. She was a Black woman in a luxury car, in a neighborhood that had an unspoken rule no brochure ever printed. You can visit, you can pass through, but you don't belong. And in that moment, standing in her own driveway, under her own roof, Judge Vanessa Porter realized something chilling. In Crest Hill, safety wasn't about behavior. It was about who people expected to see. And she didn't fit the picture. Vanessa stayed calm. She always had. Years on the bench had trained her voice not to shake, her face not to betray frustration. In court, calm wasn't just professionalism, it was power. And standing in her own driveway, with a uniformed officer inches away, she reached for that same steadiness. "This is my home," she said evenly. Her words hung in the air, clear and measured. They landed nowhere. Officer Matthew Klene didn't ask her name, didn't ask for identification, didn't ask why she was there, or who she was visiting, or how long she lived on the street. Those questions are how misunderstandings end. Instead, he issued commands. "Step out of the vehicle." Vanessa hesitated for half a second, not to resist, but to understand. "Officer," she began, "I've already exited the car. I was walking inside." "Get back in and step out properly," he snapped. Confused, she turned back toward the BMW, heart beginning to pound now. This wasn't procedure. This was control. She opened the door and sat, the seatbelt clicking automatically into place. A reflex she didn't even notice. Before she could process what was happening, the door was ripped open. Hard. The force jolted her forward as Klene grabbed her arm, yanking her sideways while the seatbelt still cut across her chest. "Sir, my seatbelt," she said, pain breaking through her calm for the first time. He didn't stop. The belt snapped free as she stumbled out, balance lost, heels scraping against the concrete. She raised her hands instinctively, palms open, fingers spread, the universal gesture of "I am not a threat." That was when he twisted her arm behind her back. The movement was sharp and unnecessary, sending a bolt of pain up her shoulder. Her robe slipped from one side, fabric catching against the hood of the car as her body was forced forward. "Stop resisting," he shouted. The words echoed down Elia Drive. Vanessa gasped. "I'm not resisting," she said clearly, her voice strained but audible. "I am complying." Her cheek pressed against the cold metal of the hood. Her heart hammered, so loud, she wondered if the microphones on his body camera could hear it. Across the street, a front door opened. Someone froze mid-step, staring. A phone came out, this time raised, recording. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Klene barked. "They are where you put them," Vanessa replied, breathless. The irony burned. She had spent years explaining the law to defendants, juries, attorneys. She had quoted statutes from memory, ruled on the limits of force, weighed the meaning of reasonable suspicion and probable cause. None of it mattered now. She tried again, not pleading, not shouting, just stating fact. "I am Judge Vanessa Porter," she said loudly, carefully. "I live at this address. You can verify it." Her voice carried. It reached the neighbors. It reached the cameras. It reached the record. But it didn't reach him. There was no pause, no hesitation, no moment of recalibration. Instead, he tightened his grip. "Don't lie to me," he said. That sentence changed everything. In that moment, her identity stopped existing. Her education, her title, her years of service to the justice system, erased by a single assumption. To him, she wasn't a judge asserting her rights. She was a suspect doubling down. Pain spread through her shoulder as he forced her arm higher. Tears welled, not from fear alone, but from disbelief. This wasn't happening in a dark alley or during a traffic stop on a highway shoulder. This was her driveway, her home. She thought of her mother, waiting for a call that never came. Thought of the cases she presided over, the officers she trusted to testify truthfully under oath. Thought of how many times she had given law enforcement the benefit of the doubt. A metallic click sounded. Handcuffs. Cold steel closed around her wrists. A collective gasp rippled from the small crowd that had gathered. Neighbors now fully outside. Phones openly recording. Someone whispered, "Isn't that the judge?" Vanessa straightened as much as she could, even bent over the hood. Her voice steadied again, drawing strength from something deeper than composure. "You are making a mistake," she said. "A serious one." Matthew Klene didn't respond. Backup arrived moments later. Two cruisers pulling in with lights flashing now, red and blue reflections dancing across manicured lawns and white siding. Officers stepped out, eyes flicking from the scene to Vanessa's face, to the cuffs, to the robe hanging half off her shoulders. One of them hesitated. "Matt," he said quietly, "what's going on?" "Suspicious individual," Klene replied. Refused to comply. Vanessa turned her head as much as the cuffs allowed. "Officer," she said to the newcomer, "I am a circuit court judge. Please check my identification. It's in my car." Silence followed. One officer moved closer, peering at her face more carefully now. Recognition flickered. "Oh," he murmured. I think she..." "Secure the scene," Klene cut in sharply. The hesitation vanished. Because once authority decides, facts stop mattering. Vanessa was led away for her own car, barefoot on concrete, robe disheveled, wrist bound. She felt exposed in a way no courtroom laws had ever made her feel. Not powerless, erased. As they placed her in the back of the cruiser, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. A black woman in handcuffs. Not a judge. not a homeowner, just another image the system knew how to justify. And as the door slammed shut, sealing her inside, Vanessa understood something with terrifying clarity. The badge didn't see her title. The uniform didn't hear her truth. Because once a narrative is chosen, identity doesn't matter. Only compliance does. And even that, sometimes, is enough. Neighbors watched in disbelief. What had begun as a quiet April afternoon unraveled into something none of them could ignore. Across Elia Drive, doors open fully now. People stepped onto porches, phones no longer hidden behind curtains but raised openly, hands shaking as reality set in. A barefoot black woman stood cuffed in her own driveway, not running, not shouting, not fighting, wearing a judge's robe. The image didn't make sense, and that was exactly why no one could look away. One phone captured her voice, steady despite the cuffs biting into her wrists. Another recorded the officer's sharp commands, each louder than the last. A Ring camera mounted beside a front door caught the full frame. The BMW parked neatly, the manicured lawn, the house behind her. Proof of ownership frozen in wide-angle clarity. "This is my home," her voice said calmly. "I don't care who you are," the officer replied. That sentence would change everything. Vanessa was placed into the back of the cruiser as neighbors spoke among themselves in hushed disbelief. "That's Judge Porter," someone whispered. "I saw her in court last year," said another. "This can't be legal," a woman muttered, her phone still recording. The door slammed shut. Inside the cruiser, Vanessa sat upright, hands cupped behind her, robe folded awkwardly beneath her. She stared forward, not at the officers, not at the crowd, but at the idea she had spent her life believing in. The law. Outside, Officer Klene began dictating his report aloud, pacing as though rehearsing. Asterisk suspicious individual. Failure to comply. Officer safety concerns. Asterisk the familiar phrases flowed easily, the same language that closed 7 previous complaints without consequence. But this time, something was different. This time, the witnesses weren't intimidated. They weren't passive. They weren't silent. A teenage boy across the street uploaded his clip to social media before the cruiser even pulled away. A neighbor emailed footage from a Ring camera to a local reporter she'd followed for years. Another sent a video to a civil rights attorney, whose name she remembered from the news. The system was used to reports being written faster than truth could spread. That advantage was gone. By the time Vanessa arrived at the precinct, still barefoot, still cuffed, the first video had already crossed city limits. By the time an officer finally verified her identity, the second clip was trending. And by the time a supervisor realized what happened, it was already too late to contain. The footage didn't need commentary. It showed everything. Her calm, his escalation, her credentials stated clearly, ignored. No editing, no distortion, just time-stamped reality. By nightfall, the city had seen it. By midnight, the country had. News anchors paused mid-sentence as clips rolled behind them. Legal analysts leaned forward, stunned not by the arrest, but by the certainty with which it happened. Former officers watched silently, recognizing procedures violated in plain sight. Judges across the nation felt something tighten in their chests. If this could happen to her, social media filled with one sentence, repeated in captions, headlines, and hashtags. "I don't care who you are." It echoed because it wasn't just about Vanessa. It was about every moment identity had been dismissed. Every time authority chose assumption over verification. Every complaint quietly filed away because addressing it would have been inconvenient. Within hours, reporters began digging. 7 internal complaints surfaced, no longer buried. For excessive force allegations, 3 racial profiling claims. Each one dismissed. Each one now reframed not as coincidence, but as pattern. Emails resurfaced. Risk management warnings flagged years earlier. Shift supervisors expressing concern about escalation. Data analysts noting disproportionate stops of black residents in affluent neighborhoods. All ignored. What had once been labeled not sustained, now read like prophecy. The department issued its first statement just before dawn. "We are aware of the incident involving an officer and a local resident. An internal review is underway. The language was careful, vague, familiar. It didn't work, because the footage told a clearer story than any press release ever could. This wasn't one bad decision in a tense moment. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a predictable outcome of unchecked behavior. Civil rights organizations weighed in before breakfast. Legal scholars dissected the video frame by frame. Former prosecutors spoke openly about how rarely judges themselves experience what defendants described every day. Vanessa was released without charges early the next morning. No apology, just silence. She returned home quietly, shoulder aching, wrist bruised, dignity shaken but intact. The driveway looked the same. The house stood exactly where it always had, but nothing else felt unchanged. When she sat down later that day, robe folded neatly beside her, she watched the videos like everyone else, not as a woman in them, but as a judge. And she saw it clearly. The failure wasn't just one officer's actions. It was the absence of intervention, the dismissal of warnings, the comfort of ignoring patterns until exposure forced action. The city council called an emergency meeting. The mayor demanded answers. The police chief placed Officer Klene on administrative leave, a move that would have gone unnoticed a week earlier, now dissected nationally. Journalists uncovered settlement payouts from similar cases. Attorneys began calling. And somewhere in the background, spreadsheets were recalculated, numbers shifting as potential liability came into focus. Because once the public sees everything, systems start speaking a different language. Money, risk, accountability. What had been invisible was now undeniable. This wasn't one mistake caught on camera. It was a system exposed in high definition. A system that had been warned. A system that had chosen silence. A system that finally ran out of places to hide. And standing at the center of it all was a barefoot black judge, calm, composed, and unwilling to let the moment pass without consequence. The city had seen everything, and it would never be able to unsee it. The lawsuit was precise, not dramatic, not theatrical, precise. Judge Vanessa Porter didn't file it out of anger. She filed it the way she did everything else. Deliberately, methodically, grounded in fact. Every claim was supported, every timestamp matched, every allegation aligned with video, policy, and precedent. There was nowhere to hide. Depositions began quietly, away from cameras. Supervisors sat across long tables, hands folded, voices careful. Under oath, the language changed. Words like miscommunication and isolated incident fell apart when confronted with emails, charts, and internal memos. Concerns had been raised. Repeatedly, one supervisor admitted he'd flagged Officer Klene's escalation patterns years earlier. Another acknowledged risk management warnings about racial disparities in his stops. A third conceded complaints were resolved quickly to avoid friction with the police union. Union pressure, they called it, not denial, not ignorance. A choice. As transcripts piled up, the narrative the department had relied on for years collapsed. This wasn't about one bad night. It was about a system that knew and chose comfort over correction. 8 months later, the city settled. $820,000. The number wasn't just compensation. It was calculation. A recognition that a jury would see what the public had already seen and likely award far more. Along with the settlement came something rarer. An admission. The city acknowledged constitutional violations. A formal statement was read aloud, not buried in fine print. The mayor issued a public apology to Judge Porter, not just for the arrest, but for the failure to act sooner. Officer Matthew Klene was terminated, not reassigned, not quietly retired, fired. His certification was revoked, his badge surrendered. The authority he had carried for nearly a decade, gone. For the first time, the consequences matched the conduct. Policy reforms followed quickly. New oversight boards were formed with civilian representation. Complaint reviews were removed from internal-only control. Early warning systems were redesigned so patterns could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Training manuals were rewritten. Supervisors were held to documentation standards they could no longer sidestep. On paper, progress arrived fast. But damage doesn't disappear just because accountability finally shows up. Vanessa returned to the bench weeks later. The courtroom stood when she entered. Respect restored in ritual, if not in memory. She ruled on cases with the same fairness she always had. But something had shifted. She listened differently now. When defendants described fear during stops, she understood it not as theory, but as muscle memory. When officers testified about split-second decisions, she weighed those words against lived reality. She hadn't lost faith in the law, but she had lost illusions about how evenly it was applied outside the courthouse. Her case became required reading in law schools. Departments across the country cited it in policy reviews. Civil rights attorneys reference it as a reminder that evidence changes everything, especially when institutions hope it won't surface. The money would help. The apology mattered. But neither could erase the image of a black woman, a judge, cuffed barefoot in her own driveway while cameras rolled. What it endured was something else. A record that couldn't be sealed. A pattern that could no longer be denied. A reminder that accountability doesn't arrive because systems grow a conscience. It arrives because someone refuses to let the truth be buried. The city paid its price. But the lesson was far more expensive because the damage wasn't just to one woman's shoulder or wrists. It was to trust. And trust, once broken, never fully resets. It demands proof vigilance and courage every single time. Judge Vanessa Porter paid that cost personally. And by doing so, she made sure the system paid it publicly, so it wouldn't be ignored again. Judge Vanessa Porter stood on the courthouse steps, not as a victim, but as a witness. She didn't ask why it happened to her. She asked why it keeps happening to others. Because if a calm, unarmed judge on her own property could be handcuffed, dismissed, and ignored, what protection exists for those without titles, cameras, or credibility? This story isn't about one officer. It's about what happens when warnings are buried, complaints are closed to convenience, and authority replaces listening. Justice isn't proven by settlements or apologies. It's proven by prevention. And until the words, "I live here," are enough, the story isn't over.